What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom where even the law was written by men who believed piracy was unnatural in a woman? The answer, as history coldly shows, was almost none. Captured female pirates were rarely offered mercy. In the 1600s and 1700s, the so-called Golden Age of piracy, British Navy courts showed little tolerance for piracy of any kind, but female defendants were seen as doubly wrong. They had broken not only empire law, but gender rules deeply built into the social order. Trials took place in temporary naval courts, often held in colonies like Jamaica or New Providence. These courts worked without juries, and the outcomes were typically decided ahead of time. The legal process was quick, but not without drama. Testimonies were gathered from ship captains, naval officers, and at times frightened sailors who feared their own connection with piracy. The accused had few legal rights. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two of the most well-known female pirates in history, stood trial in 1720 in Spanish Town, Jamaica. According to the official court transcript, when Bonny was sentenced to death, she said bitterly to her lover, "Calico Jack, if you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Their defense? Pregnancy. Known as pleading the belly, it was one of the few legal protections given to women. In Bonny and Read's case, it worked, temporarily, but most female pirates did not share their luck. Many faced their verdicts in silence, knowing the court had already judged them guilty long before they ever spoke, hanged at execution dock for piracy. The river rolled silently past Wapping, but the cries of the crowd shattered the morning calm. Here at London's infamous execution dock, countless pirates, men and women, met their end, hanging from the gallows just above the murky waters of the Thames. It was here that the British Empire made a gruesome example of piracy, and female pirates, though rare, were no exception. Under British maritime law, piracy was a capital crime. The Piracy Act of 1698, passed under King William III, made clear that all and every person so offending shall suffer pains of death. Unlike land-based executions, these hangings were carried out by the Navy, and the chosen site, execution dock, served as a symbol. Pirates would die with the tide that had once given them freedom. Women found guilty of piracy were sentenced with the same finality as men. The executions followed a cruel ritual. The condemned were led from Newgate Prison, paraded through London in a cart under armed guard, jeered at by crowds. Once at Wapping, they were made to stand under the gallows, sometimes with a noose already tightened around their necks. They were not dropped with a long fall to ensure quick death. Instead, the short drop caused prolonged choking, a method known as the marshal's dance, as the body would shake terribly before going still. Though female pirate executions were fewer in number, they were no less brutal. Mary Critchett, an American woman who joined a crew of escaped convicts turned pirates in 1729, was captured near Virginia and tried in Williamsburg. Found guilty of piracy, she was sentenced to death and hanged, without fanfare, without delay. No pleas of pregnancy saved her. These public executions were meant not just to punish, but to terrify. The bodies of the worst offenders were left hanging until 3 tides had washed over them, a punishment called gibbeting. While this was more common for male pirates, the very threat was a message to all. Piracy would not be forgiven. Regardless of gender, in the shadow of the gallows, female pirates were reduced from legends to lessons, examples sacrificed to uphold empire and order, flogged in front of crowds. Before the rope, many female pirates felt the whip. Flogging, an ancient and painful punishment, was frequently used by naval authorities and colonial governors to inflict public shame and physical pain on captured pirates. For women, this punishment carried an added layer of spectacle. Their bodies became tools of warning, and the crowds were expected to learn through their suffering. Flogging was typically done with the cat-o'-nine-tails, a brutal whip of knotted cords capable of tearing flesh with each strike. Sentences could range from a dozen lashes to over 100, depending on how serious the offense was and the decision of the court. The punishment was carried out publicly, often on the docks or outside the prison gates, where townspeople, including women and children, would gather to witness the spectacle. In 1720, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, after their capture by Jamaican authorities, were reportedly kept in terrible conditions and subjected to harsh treatment even before their trial. Though there's no direct record of flogging being used on them during imprisonment, female pirates in other colonies, such as those captured off the coast of the American colonies or the West Indies, were routinely flogged as part of their sentencing or to force confessions. For naval authorities, the flogging of female pirates served two purposes: deterrence and degradation. Women who had dared to lead or fight aboard ships were brought low before the public eye, their blood mixing with salt air and cobblestones. These punishments were not just about justice, they were about control. And the spectacle of pain ensured the message reached far beyond the gallows. Forced into concubinage or slavery, not every captured female pirate was marched to the gallows. In some cases, particularly in colonial ports of the Caribbean, West Africa, and the Americas, women were not executed, but instead forced into lives of concubinage, forced labor, or slavery. However, direct evidence of this fate specifically for female pirates is sparse. Historians acknowledge that while piracy was a male-dominated domain, women involved in piracy could meet a wide range of ends depending on their nationality, race, class, and the discretion of colonial authorities. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where the lines between piracy, privateering, and slavery often blurred, captured women aboard pirate ships, especially those of African or indigenous descent, were sometimes sold into slavery, regardless of their status as crew members or captives. Records from Portobelo and Cartagena during the late 1600s describe women taken from pirate ships and processed as spoils of war. Moreover, black and mixed-race women found aboard vessels were frequently assumed to be enslaved. In such cases, they were absorbed into plantation economies or kept as house servants and concubines by colonial officials or merchants. Records rarely distinguish between female pirates and other women found on captured ships, making it difficult to draw precise lines, but the practice of forced servitude was widespread. What we do know is that for many women, capture did not mean a swift execution. It meant disappearance into households, plantations, or ship's holds, stripped of identity, history, and recognition. A quiet erasure, recorded not in verdicts, but in silence, left to die on prison ships. For some captured female pirates, death did not come quickly at the gallows. It came slowly, silently, and out of sight, aboard the rotting hulks of prison ships. These floating prisons, anchored off colonial coasts or British harbors, were never designed for long-term human confinement. Yet they became holding places for pirates, rebels, and those considered enemies of the crown, including, at times, women. While detailed records of female pirates specifically dying on prison ships are limited, the broader context is undeniable. Captured women were often confined in the same brutal conditions as men. In the 1700s, as prison populations surged and land-based jails overflowed, the British Navy and colonial authorities turned to decommissioned warships. These vessels, stripped of sails and left to decay in harbors, were anchored in places like Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Kingston, Jamaica. Conditions aboard these ships were horrendous. Prisoners were shackled below deck in cramped, dark, and airless holds. Disease, especially typhus, dysentery, and smallpox, spread rapidly. Food was scarce and often spoiled. Women on these ships were doubly vulnerable. In addition to starvation and illness, many endured exploitation and severe mistreatment, including forms of abuse by guards or sailors, though this was rarely recorded formally. Lacking both rights and recognition, they were often left out of the records altogether. On these silent decks, history did not record executions. It recorded absence. And in that absence, the fate of many female pirates was sealed, forgotten not by accident but by design. Their punishments were not just sentences, they were tools of fear, gendered power, and empire control. The fate of female pirates revealed how deeply the maritime world feared women who defied it. These stories still echo in the silence of prison ships and the shadows of gallows. What does their erasure from history say about power, justice, and who is remembered? Comment below. As the ancient Roman historian Tacitus wrote, "The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws."